I'm Dick Billows, and we'll be working together on the course. So let me tell you a bit about my background so you know who you're dealing with. I'm a certified project management professional from PMP, and the Gartner Institute has also given me a certification in IT project management. I was a partner in the fourth largest professional firm in the world, Grant Thornton International, managing projects all over the United States and overseas in South America, the Near East, and Africa. In addition to individual projects, I moved up after a while and managed large programs for clients and portfolios of projects for multiple clients. Then I was recruited by a Fortune 200 company, SmithKline, to manage their hundreds of projects and project managers in a 14-state region. After that, I started 4pm.com, where I've worked with more than 300 organizations in the United States and abroad, developing their project managers and improving their project management processes. Now, the techniques covered in this course are based on my 25 years of experience managing projects and, as importantly, developing project managers. Project Management Institute has reviewed and approved this course as teaching the best practices in project management, and is consistent with the current edition of their project management body of knowledge. In sum, I know what works in project management because I've been there and I've done it. Our focus here is exclusively on what works in the real world, not theories or vague concepts. Okay, let's talk about the project scope. It is a biggie in project management. The scope defines what the project sponsor wants you to deliver at the end of the project. Sometimes the scope is a tangible deliverable, like a 9-story office building. Other times, the scope is a new clinic with trained nurses and techs that can serve 200 patients a day. Alternatively, the scope could be a computer information system that processes and issues electronic paychecks for 10,000 people at a cost of $2.25 each. Each scope needs a crystal clear definition of what you're going to deliver, like the examples I gave you. Notice they all had numbers. If we don't know what the project sponsor, the boss, or the customer wants, we have to guess. And our odds of success are very, very low when I don't know what the sponsor wants me to deliver. You've seen some examples of a good scope statement, good scope definitions that are crystal clear and measurable. However, there's a lot of confusion about what the scope statement is and what it is not. You'll hear a lot of bad information. The scope is a deliverable, something we produce for the project sponsor. It's not the due date, or the budget, or the first thing we're going to do. And it surely is not the technical specifications. It's the business outcome of the project. With a good definition of the scope, we're able to control the project and avoid doing anything that does not contribute to producing the deliverable that the boss, customer, or sponsor wants. A good scope statement lets us make clear assignments to the project team, as well as make accurate estimates and track progress accurately. Now, too many projects are started without a good scope definition, and that is the number one cause of failure. It leaves the project manager in a situation where he or she can't control changes or track progress. Also, the PM is stuck giving team members vague assignments about what they're supposed to do. All that wastes time and money. On the illustration, you see examples of bad scope statements, and then how we have converted them into good scope statements by asking the sponsor the right questions. Let's analyze the first example. A scope to be a low-cost leader may sound good, but we have no real idea of what we have to deliver. We have no idea what's good enough or what low-cost means. Nor do we understand what will satisfy the customer or the boss. When we ask some questions to find out what the boss or customer actually wants, we can convert that vague statement about being a low-cost leader into something very specific, like cut operating costs by $10,000 a month, then we know exactly what the boss wants. Other examples on the chart are similar. On the left, we have a typical kind of a statement that people use to define a project that causes a mess. If we ask the right questions, after we hear one of those statements on the left, we can convert it into a metric, something that is measurable, like the examples on the right-hand side. So when the sponsor says we need to become a low-cost leader, your follow-on question is, well, how much do we have to cut costs to be a low-cost leader? If the sponsor doesn't give you an answer, you might throw out a possible metric like, would a $10,000 cost reduction make us a low-cost leader? If the boss agrees, you have a good metric. If he gives you a different number, you still have a good metric. Defining the scope is the hardest thing in project management. I'll teach you how to ask the right questions and how to overcome the obstacles that get in the way of defining the scope properly. Let's look at the big picture of scope as you see on the slide. The first thing we have to do is meet with the decision maker, with the project sponsor. Project manager can't decide what the scope of the project is, nor can the boss's assistant or secretary or some subordinate manager. They're unlikely to know how the project fits into the bigger picture that the boss or the customer has in mind. Now, if the boss or the customer tries to delegate decision-making about the scope, you are headed for failure. So a little polite pushback to get a few minutes of the boss's time is worth it. Frankly, the sponsor, the customer, or the boss has to define the scope. That's their role on the project. When you get the boss or the customer to sit down for a few minutes to discuss the scope, use your time well. By using your time well, I mean you don't do a lot of talking. Project managers should do very little talking in this session. We want to ask one or two open-ended questions that get the boss talking about the project results. The PM should sit back and listen. Zip it. Listen for the deliverables that the boss wants. Getting the boss to talk is usually not difficult, as most executives like to talk. So you should ask them questions like, what will the department be like 6 months after this project is done? How will things be different? How will things be better? Notice, those are open-ended questions that can't be answered with a yes or a no. They get the boss talking. Once that flow of information starts, let it go and just listen. As the boss talks, you're listening intently and with encouraging nods. You understand, yes. You need to convert those vague wishes into deliverables the boss wants and document those deliverables as the boss talks. That's what the big picture is. Now let's get into the details of that meeting. Now let's go back over the process in detail. The first step in planning the scope is to get a meeting with the project sponsor or your boss or the customer. Your project will fail if you have the scope definition meeting with anybody other than the person who will judge the success of your project at the end. Key point. Therefore, if the project sponsor tries to delegate the scope planning to their assistant or a secretary or a supervisor, you need to politely push back. You need to explain that it's going to be impossible for you to give the sponsor what he or she wants if you don't find out what that is. And it's unlikely that other people will be able to tell you what is in the sponsor's mind. Therefore, you have to make a big effort to get a meeting with the sponsor, but it doesn't have to be a long one. You need to stress that. Second step is that You as the project manager do very little talking in the meeting. This is not the time to try and impress the sponsor with your technical skills. Too many project managers do this. And if you try that, the executive may never meet with you again. Instead, you want to ask one or two open-ended questions about the project's end results and let the sponsor talk. Most executives like to do the talking as you sit attentively, nodding and taking notes. While the stream of words is coming out, you're listening for activities that you can convert to deliverables, as we've done, and come up with the metrics, just like you saw a few slides back. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Sometimes getting a good scope statement is easy, particularly when the customer or the sponsor is savvy about projects and knows the value of a clear scope statement. But other times, the project manager needs to overcome a lot of obstacles to get the scope of the project defined. Some executives talk in generalities about mission statements. Well, that has a place. It is not a project scope definition. It's too mushy. Other executives, particularly those who have not decided what they want, talk about you starting now and doing the planning later. That is a project death trap, because much money and time will be wasted doing the wrong things while the boss is trying to decide. Still, other executives are too busy to plan, and others will join the planning effort, but all they want to do is discuss the tiny details of the first task you're going to do. The response to all these barriers is to explain how having a crystal clear definition of the scope, the end result, substantially increases the odds of success in a project. Not defining the scope almost certainly dooms a project to failure, and you need to tell the sponsor that. Now let's go through a real example of defining scope, and I also want to show you how to capture the information in your course template. So you're a commercial contractor just getting started, and a new customer contacts you about doing a small project. You meet, and the customer tells you that he wants new shelving for the company's supply room. Now you were hoping for a little bit bigger project, but it would still be good to get a new customer, and perhaps there might be additional work out there. Obviously, it's very important that this new customer be happy with your work on the supply room. You start thinking about what kind of lumber you're going to use and have to order, and how you need to take some measurements in the supply room. Then you realize you're caught in the activity trap, diving into the details before you understand the scope of the job. Without knowing the scope, you could build a great set of shelves and still not solve this customer's problem. Therefore, you step back and you use your scope planning techniques. You say to the customer, I understand you want some new shelves, but I want to be sure I build you the correct kind of shelves, so I need to know what problem you want the shelves to solve. And how will things be different in your supply room after the new shelves are installed? The customer frowns and says, I thought you were a construction contractor. You say, I am, but I want you to be delighted with my work, which means the whole project has to be a success. That's why I'd like to know what problem you need solved and what you will look for at the end of the project to decide if we were successful. Customer nods and says, well, that makes sense. The problem I'm trying to solve is that my employees are wasting too much time getting supplies they need out of the supply room. Sometimes they spend 20 minutes digging through the crap in there. And that's why I want new shelves built. It's a mess, and despite all the memos I sent out to people, they never put the supplies where they belong. In addition, it's such a mess that we're always running out of supply. We don't know how much we have of various kinds of stuff. And that really wastes time when we run out. So I want the shelves to cut the time it takes to get supplies out of the supply run. You think about that for a minute and then ask, okay, it's taking too long now. How long should it take to get something out of the supply run? Oh, the customer thinks about it and says, well, most of the time, people should be able to find the supplies they need in less than 2 minutes. Of course, new shelves alone may not do that. You nod and say, first of all, that's a very clear goal. Would it be correct to say you want 85% of the people to find the supply they want in less than 2 minutes? Would that make this project a success? Customer nods, and so you continue. I agree that there's a little more to this project than just building shelves, isn't there? The customer nods agreement, and you're done defining the scope of the project, aren't you? You may be asking yourself, why does he want us to spend so much time asking these questions of the project sponsor? Well, the answer is that we substantially improve the odds of success by defining what the project has to deliver in measurable terms. That means numbers, as you've been seeing, or yes-nos, as you've also seen. But every deliverable in the project is defined with an acceptance criteria that tells everybody what we have to deliver and how it will be measured. So we start, as you've seen, with a clear scope. Then next we're going to talk about identifying 4 to 7 high-level deliverables that lead to that scope. And then when we gather requirements in the next module, we'll also be looking for the same kind of measured deliverables. So, as you can see on the chart, the reason we do this is how the probability of project failure decreases as we define each of the deliverables in measurable form. That's why we do it, and it's why the best project managers build outstanding track records of consistent project success with well-defined deliverables. That's the reason we're spending so much time. With the scope defined, our next step is to decompose it, which is fancy language for, or break it into 4 to 5, maybe 7 sometimes, high-level deliverables that lead us from where we are now to the scope. It's the major steps we're going to take in the project, as always, each defined as a measured deliverable. In a sense, these high-level deliverables are stepping stones to the scope. They are the backbone of our project, and we'll further subdivide them down to the level of individual assignments for our team, and those will be deliverables too. Another name for this process is top-down planning. We start with the scope and then break it down. It's the best way to plan projects because when we have finished breaking the scope into its major components with the sponsor, we'll make them measurable too, and that'll give the sponsor the key checkpoints they'll need. Next, let's talk about the 2 options for decomposing the scope into deliverables. In the slide above, the blue high-level deliverables are produced in sequence, step by step. We produce the first major deliverable, and then we can start the second, which is waiting for the results of the deliverable of that first major high-level deliverable, and so on. We call this sequential decomposition. The other option is a parallel structure, where we can work on all 4 of the major deliverables in this project at the same time. We want to think about how we're going to decompose at this point, because it makes a big difference in our requirements gathering and the eventual development of your schedule. We can also find that in some larger projects, we have a mix of these two alternatives. Project manager nods at the scope statement and says, okay, let's talk about the major deliverables that we have to produce that will take us from where we are now to the goal of finding supplies in 2 minutes or less. The sponsor says with a smile, you really are thorough. The project manager nods and says, this is the only way I can be sure that you get exactly what you want on the project. Project manager finishes writing the scope down and then says, okay, let's talk about the major deliverables that we have to produce that will get us from where we are now to the goal of finding supplies in 2 minutes or less. The customer says with a smile, you really are thorough. Project manager nods and answers, saying, this is the only way I can be sure that you get exactly what you want from the project. Is planning it top down. Customer smiles and says, okay, you're right. We need to build the right sort of shelves. And to do that, we need a design of how we should store our supplies on those shelves. Project manager nods and thinks for a moment and then says, that design has to be aimed at finding supplies in less than 2 minutes and not running out so often. A very knowledgeable person who knows your supplies and the whole situation should do that design. The customer nods and says, my office administrator, Pearl, is the perfect person, and she can talk to everybody who uses the supply room and come up with the design and set the reorder quantities all in the same package and get agreement on it. Project manager adds, I think we can measure that design, the deliverable from it should be your approval of the design. You should make the judgment that it will let people find supplies in less than 2 minutes, and if you think it meets that criteria, then you approve the design. I'll work with Pearl and produce a construction plan for my side of it and a budget as well that you can approve at the same time. The customer agrees and says, okay, what next? You build the shelves? Project manager smiles back and says, yes, as soon as the building department approves the plans and issues a building permit. Then I'll build the shelves according to the design you approve, and we submit it to the building department, and the inspectors will check the work to ensure that it complies with the building code. Then they'll issue a certificate of occupancy, a CO, and that's the deliverable for the construction. And it's the way you'll measure my performance on the construction of the shelves. The customer says, then we're done with the planning? Project manager answers, not quite. At the same time we're building the supply room, Pearl is figuring out the reorder points on all the different supply items so we don't run out of stock so much. Does no more than supply out of stock 5 times a month sound right? Customer says, yeah, that would be a lot better than we're doing now. So the project manager goes on. Next, we need to teach your people who order supplies how to stock the new shelves according to the design and how to reorder supplies when an item reaches its reorder point, its minimum quantity. I think they should pass a test, have a class and pass a test so we know that they know what they're doing. Customer laughs and says, that's right. Fail the test and no more reordering until you pass it. Now, are we done? Wait, I have a 5th deliverable. We need to teach people the design and then how to follow it. So when they remove supplies from the supply room or have to put things back, they're following the overall plan. Project manager nods and says, maybe they need to show us that they can find 5 items in less than 10 minutes. that'd be a good measure that they know what the plan is. Customer smiles and says, perfect, this is great. We have a scope and 5 major deliverables and we're ready to go. Project manager replies, right. Now I'll break those high-level deliverables down into smaller deliverables, all measurable. To do that, I should meet with your people so they can help work on the deliverables and are clear on what they're accountable for. The meeting shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. Customer says, I'll set it up for tomorrow. This way of planning makes everything clear, and doing this thinking is going to avoid a lot of problems down the road. Project manager nods. Yep. We've covered a number of critical techniques in this module. First, I stress the importance of meeting with the right decision maker, the person who's sponsoring the project and will be the judge of its success at the end. I also focused on the project manager keeping his or her mouth shut for most of the planning session. Instead, you want to engage in active listening with a lot of eye contact and nodding and close attention to everything the executive says. That encourages almost everyone to do a lot of talking. We all like an attentive audience. As you're listening to the executive talk and asking your open-ended questions, you're converting unmeasurable wishes, wants, and desires into hard-edged metrics. You're asking, how low does the error rate have to be? Or, how many items would be acceptable to have on the punch list? When you have your sponsor's agreement on those metrics for the major deliverables, you're ready to move into requirements gathering.